Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks become the stepping stones to growth and clarity. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today's guest is Rodney Phillips, a man who proves that a dream deferred is not a dream denied. By day, he built a successful career in pharmaceutical industry and spent over 20 years mentoring youth athletes in Pittsburgh. But hidden in his home office filing cabinet was a manuscript he started writing when he was just 19 years old. For 37 years, that story sat untouched while life happened. But at age 56, he finally dusted it off. He is here to share the journey of bringing his novel Dissension to life and why it's never too late to finish what you started. Rodney, it's a pleasure to welcome you to FailCraft. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ezekiel. I really appreciate you reaching out to me so we could have a good discussion. And thank you for the intro. Yeah, that pretty funny story about the book.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So let's dive in, Rodney. The timeline of your story is incredible. So you started writing Dissension at 19, but then it sat in a filing cabinet for 37 years before you published it at 56. So can you take us back to those decades in the middle? So did you ever did you ever look at that filing cabinet and feel a sense of failure or regret that you hadn't finished it?
Well, yeah. I did feel a little sense of failure. I had tried to pull it out maybe, 5 or 6 times over that time frame, but never really got too far. And what's funny about it is I actually started to write the book at 19 kind of out of boredom because at that time I was a teenager and I was working in a furniture store and all I did was load furniture for people that came to pick it up. And there was a lot of downtime, and I played a lot of sports in high school and teenage years, but I enjoyed writing as well. So I had this story in my head and I started to, take notes on these like stock cards in the furniture store. And that's actually how the story actually originally started. And then I graduated at that time to some legal pads and then some also notebooks. And then that's what stayed in my file cabinet, as life, like you said, took over and I, went to college and started a career, had a family, the whole 9 yards, and it sat untouched. I mean, I pulled it out a couple times and, tried to get into it and really didn't. And what sparked me getting back into it actually was my wife because I'd coached youth football and youth boys and girls lacrosse for over 20 years.
Mhm.
And Saturdays and Sundays, I was used to, get up early in the morning and I'd be gone till late at night on both days, coaching. And with me not coaching and both of our kids going to college, I had all this free time on the weekends and I was kind of driving my wife crazy. And she's like, well, you need to find something to do. You got to find a hobby. I'm like, well, maybe I'll pull my book out. And she's like, are those all those notebooks that we have in the filing cabinet? I said, yeah, I've had those, since I was 19. And I said, I might pull those out and see what I have. And that was pretty much the spark that then had me attack this failure of it sitting there for years.
All right, Rodney. That was a really interesting story. Thank you very much for sharing with us. So you wrote the skeleton of this story as a teenager, but you finished it as a man with a master's degree and decades of life experience. How much did the story or the way you viewed the characters, the way you viewed the characters' conflict change because you had changed in these few decades in between the writing process?
So that is a great question, Ezekiel, because of the fact that, your view of the world at 19 is drastically different, right, than your view at 56. And this
Mm,
book is almost written, if you think about it, with two separate authors, even though I'm the same guy. And the reason why
Yeah.
I say that is because, I had a good shell of the book. I had, a lot of chapters, probably 60 chapters that I had written at 19 that were in the notebooks. And it took me about 2 months. So my wife calls me the weekend writer because really I only write Saturday and Sunday mornings. And I call it making an appointment with my book. So if we're not doing anything, I'll typically grab a coffee and I sit down and I write. And it took me probably 2 months to get it out of the notebooks, all the handwritten notes into the computer, because, back then we didn't even have a computer. So I took it word for word. Everything that I had on the stock cards, everything that I had in the notebooks, I wrote it word for word what it was into the computer. I typed it all in. And then I started, analyzing it, looking at it from there. And like you said, the perspective of my characters and the degree to which I had them developed drastically changed. I actually had created these sheets that are basically like descriptions of my characters. So all my characters, my bad characters, my good characters, all I did everything from, hair color, eye color, size, all of those superficial things, but I went deeper. And, I look at things like I want realistic characters. So I want characters that have flaws, have bad habits, have positive traits, right? So each character I developed kind of a sheet for them, and then I infused that back into the book. And a lot of life lessons that I've learned over the years, or leadership, or communication or lack of communication, because that's really what spirals this story out of control. And it's called Dissension, a disagreement that leads to discord. But what it's about, it's set in Pittsburgh and Miami. And my main character, Kylie, is going to the University of Miami studying criminal law. She gets caught between a war that breaks out between two rival drug cartels. One is Cuban and one is Mexican, starts being hunted by a hitman. And then you find out through twists in the book, which I won't give away, but twists in the book of why she's specifically being targeted. So why I say lack of communication is because they were at peace for a long period of time before this happened. And something happens with one of the cartels that then triggers this kind of turf war, if you will, and it sparks it out of control. If, looking back on it, these two cartels would have just communicated, it probably wouldn't have created the conflict and chaos that it does in the book.
All right, Rodney. Yeah, great response, I'd say. So, your book is about how, a single disagreement spirals into chaos. So, in your 20 years of, coaching youth sports and working in HR, so, you've likely seen this in real life. So, how do you think most people feel when it comes to conflict, when it comes to resolving conflict before it explodes?
Yeah, so I think, most people, don't look deeper into conflict, right? They're looking at just the surface, but really conflict brings out the deeper truths, if you will, because if everything's hunky dory, then, everybody just keeps to themselves and keeps moving forward, right? It takes conflict to really expose what the real priorities are and to uncover what those truths are, or what those people are feeling in that moment. In the book Dissension, I also explore, like you said, I've been a coach, for a long period of time and have had lots of leaders over the years. And, in one cartel, all the subordinates follow the leader, even though they don't agree with the direction that they're going, they step in line and they follow, right? In the other cartel, I explored the theme of the leader doesn't know what's going on with his subordinates. And that's kind of like how this conflict and dissension arose. Was one of the subordinates was doing something that they weren't agreed to between the peace treaty between the two cartels. And like I said, if lack of communication, if they would have just followed up with the leader of the other cartel before reacting to it, and typically in conflict, the reaction happens before you think through the other side of the coin.
All right. So you published your debut novel in your piece. I mean, doing that requires a lot of courage. So did you battle any imposter syndrome, wondering if you had missed your window to be a writer?
Yes, very much so. I actually questioned myself quite a few times. And how this kind of transpired was I'm an avid reader. I like to read a bunch of different genres and, things of that nature. My wife's an avid reader, and then we have a bunch of friends that are. So originally, when I completed the book, I gave it to my wife and probably like 5 other friends, and they all loved it. They loved the direction of the story, they loved the characters, and then I started questioning myself, I'm gonna send this out because my wife is like, "Well, you should send it out and see what happens," right? And I started questioning, I'm going to send this out. Who's Rodney Phillips? Nobody's going to want to, listen to this story, So I ended up going on to ChatGPT and doing a query for it to look for what publishing companies in the United States take new authors with new ideas, not your established Tom Clancy's or Sandra Brown's or, James Patterson's, but new authors, new ideas. And really, it came back with only 4 publishing companies in the whole United States. So I ended up sending it to all 4. The first one turned it down within 24 hours. So right away, I'm like, oh, here we go. Get all these no's. And I don't even know if they read the book, quite honest with you. They turned it down so fast. But then the other 3 wanted it. So then I ended up getting on to virtual calls with them, and then we decided to move forward with the publisher that we did. So I kind of got lucky, I, I guess you'd say, because it is challenging to become a published author. I mean, I read somewhere, I think it's only like 1.3% of the people that want to write a book actually become
Wow, wow, wow. That's such a crazy stat. Uh,
it is
all
really.
right, fantastic. So, Rodney, as a coach and mentor that you are right now, so you teach kids about leadership. So, how do you explain the concept of patience to a young athlete who wants success now, using your own 37-year journey as an example?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I instill. So I coached football, and then I coached boys and girls lacrosse. So a variety of athletes, right?
Mm,
So there's a couple things in the way that I coach that I think resonate with the kids, and also they've come back and talked to me about certain things. One of them is hard work. You know, you need to put hard work in, right? With this book, I put hard work in, for a long period of time in order to fulfill my dream. Um, but when you're an athlete, hard work matters, right? Practice matters. If you're talking football and you're talking hand technique or hip turn or, inside shoulder coverage with a corner, that is, you have to practice that. You're not just going to walk onto the game and do well, right? With lacrosse, ground balls are super important. If you win ground balls, you're controlling the ball, you're controlling the game. So, if you're not practicing ground balls, your chances of going into the game and getting ground balls are slim, right? So that's one of the aspects is hard work. The other thing that I try to instill in young athletes is feedback. To me, feedback is a gift, whether that would be positive or negative feedback. Somebody's taken the time to give you feedback. To me, that's a gift, because either they're trying to help you with something that, you're not doing well, or B, they're giving you positive feedback and you feel good about it, right? I would always tell my athletes, if I'm giving you feedback, listen, right? Because I'm trying to help you, whether that's hand technique, like I said, footwork, hip turn, whatever it may be in the sport that we're talking about. I'm going to give you positive and I'm going to give you negative feedback, but that's what you're going to experience in life, right? So my third thing that I would always tell them is be coachable. If you're coachable, you're employable, right, Ezekiel? So, if you're coachable and you can listen to your leaders and you can, interact with your teammates and you work together as a team, you do your job. Like in football, I was a defensive coordinator. So everybody had a job, right? Everybody has a gap. Everybody has their job. And my, message was you do your job. Ezekiel's going to do his job. Jimmy's going to do his job, right? And together we can win, So I think those three things, being accepting of feedback, being coachable, and working hard, translate through the rest of your life, right? And in my situation, I can now tell the kids that I've coached, I'll tell my kids, don't give up on your dreams. I started writing this book when I was 19. It sat there for years, but I didn't give up on the dream. I went back to it and worked hard to make sure that I, told the story that I was trying to tell, and also grew the characters in a direction that I wanted them to resonate with the reader.
All right, truly inspiring, dear Rodney. So, for the listener right now who has, a dream, maybe a manuscript, a business plan, or a song sitting in a drawer for years, perhaps, and they are telling themselves it's too late to start or continue from where they stop. So, what's the first step they should take to prove themselves wrong?
I think the first step and what worked for me is if it's important to you, make it a priority. And I call what I do making an appointment with my book. So Saturday and Sunday mornings, if my wife and I aren't doing something, I have an appointment with my book and I treat it just like a business appointment or an interview, like you and I were scheduled today to talk. That's an appointment, right? I
Yeah.
treat it like a priority. And whether or not that's fixing some things that I wanted to correct or writing new ideas, I carve that specific time out for that, appointment. And I'm currently working on the sequel because my publisher in April asked me to start writing the sequel because they really liked the first book. So I'm doing the exact same thing. And the reason why I say that is make that a priority is if I just said, oh, well, tonight, I might write, right? Or tonight I might pull my book out. Chances are slim that I'm going to accomplish anything or I'm going to get anything done, right? But by knowing that, hey, Saturday morning, 9 a.m., I'm starting to work on my book, now things are percolating, right? So during the week, I take notes on my phone when I'm working or when I'm out and about and I have some ideas. I just put them in the notes on my cell phone. And then when I go, Saturday, I go through my notes on my cell phone and I say, okay, here's where I wanted to plug this in. Here's where I thought this dialogue hit. You know what I mean? But make it a priority. So if it's important to those listeners that you're talking about, you have to make it a priority. You can't just talk about it and say, hey, I might do it, right? Or I might get to it. Or maybe Thursday night, I've got some time, I might pull it out, whatever it may be, So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think, if something's important, if you make it a priority, then you can move it forward. But then it's my other, you have to put the hard work in to move it, right?
All right. Thank you very much for that great piece of advice. So, Rodney, after a long corporate career, raising a family and achieving this dream of, being an author, so I'd like to know what does being successful truly mean to you now?
Yeah, so, I still have a long career left in my regular job, but, in pharmaceuticals. I work in oncology. I probably have like 6 to 8 or so, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on the weekends, I'm working that job, right? As far as being successful as an author, I'm excited about it because it's something I can look forward to in retirement. I would love to do this in retirement. If this first book, does well, and then I have the sequel, I actually have a third book in mind that I want to do a prequel to before Dissension of what was going on with the cartels when my main character was a teenager before she got caught up into this, situation. So that's kind of exciting to me because I would love to do that in retirement. It keeps my mind, active and doing things. And I love to create characters and I love to, put them in situations. And like I said, create characters that have flaws and bad habits and, like a real person, but put them in different situations and then think through, like, if I was this character, how would I react? Would it be brash? Would it be a strategic thinker? You know what I mean? Like, so I
Mm,
love doing that. So that's why I'm like very excited about this author's journey because I feel like, it could give me something in retirement to work on and I love to write, so it's
yeah,
exciting, I didn't
yeah,
realize that I would be on this journey 37 years after I started the book, but it's awesome.
great. So, finally, Rodney, for our listeners who want to read your book or follow your work, so where is the best place for them to go?
So the best place would be to rodneyphillipsauthor.com. And there you'll see a trailer of the book and then a synopsis of the prologue of the book and where you can order the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Apple Books and the publisher's website as well. And then, I'm open, especially if you have writers out there that, need help or want to bounce ideas off of each other or just have a sounding board or somebody to listen to. I went through a journey and, very willing to talk to anybody. So my email is rphillips66@yahoo.com. So if you have any listeners that would like to reach out to me and talk through stories that they're working on, like you said, maybe it's in a similar story to mine where it's in a file cabinet and they have this idea and they just are having trouble getting started. I would love to.
All right, it's great to hear that. So this has been such an inspiring, reminder about persistence, Rodney, and I am truly excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you reaching out to me, Ezekiel. I love your show and I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts after you reached out to me and you do such a great job as a host. And I really appreciate it, bud.